Welcome to part one of this special Cannes Lion 2025 edition of the Time for a Reset Marketing podcast, brought to you by Overline and recorded in partnership with Nectar 360. In this segment, we speak with senior brand marketers about how they're navigating one of the most dynamic periods in modern marketing. We'll dive into the big questions shaping the industry, from balancing brand and performance to evolving retail partnerships, and how retail media is driving new value across the funnel. And of course, we'll hear what caught our guest's eye at Cannes Lion this year. Let's get into the conversation.
Welcome to our Time for a Reset podcast. I'm Angela Myers. I lead retail media for Goodway Group, and I'm here with Liz Caselli-Mechael, and you are from World Central Kitchen. Please tell us about your role.
So World Central Kitchen is a nonprofit founded by Chef Jose Andres, and we really focus on bringing meals in the aftermath of disaster to communities that need that food, but also that comfort and that ability to come together. So we were founded 15 years ago in Haiti. Today, we're in many parts of the U.S., Kentucky, St. Louis, California, as well as Ukraine and Gaza.
That's wonderful. And your role specifically?
Yeah, I lead external marketing and communications. So while it can be distinct for nonprofit, we found that there's a lot that private and retail and nonprofit and NGO have to learn from each other.
Yeah. Great. All right. So we're going to chat a little bit about your brand, you as a brand today, and how that fits in the retail media space. So first, let's start with within your role, you have to balance what you're doing from a brand perspective with a performance perspective. So how do you think about that when you're budgeting and planning for the media that you're going to run?
I think the biggest thing that we've evolved on is getting to a better point in treating different audiences differently and acknowledging that they have other kinds of exposure that we don't control that may contribute to where they are in the funnel as well. So for us, media coverage during a disaster may make someone much more familiar with us, and they may be ready to move farther along on the funnel or in the journey than someone in a country that hasn't been exposed to our work before. So what we've tried to do, rather than think about an overarching guidance for any kind of split between top of funnel and lower funnel, is that we've really tried to customize that by segment and lean in on lower funnel for communities and countries where we're pretty well known, where we've already built strong trust, but to really take that step back and make a proper investment in understanding the brand and knowing what our values are and what our differentiators are in areas where folks won't have had those other kinds of exposure to us. So breaking that into segments has been a huge part of starting to figure out that split.
Yeah. And that's really fascinating because it sounds like the planning aspect is really centered on audience. And what a dynamic business that you're in, right? Because there's an element of that, well, this thing happened, here's a reaction. How do you think about recency and time in planning, if at all?
Yeah, planning, if at all, is definitely like a key phrase. I think we try to have a strong perspective, strong tools in place, but the reality is that we don't and can't plan our campaigns. We're going into U.S. hurricane season now, so we're anticipating that there's going to be a lot of responding within the U.S. in the next few months, but we don't know where we're going to be or when that hurricane's going to strike. And when people are really the most attuned to it and ready to be part of the response is in that first 48 hours. So really our standard for ourselves is that once we know we're responding, we want something in market in the first 2 hours. That's a big change for me. I come from a CPG background. We had long planning cycles at my previous home at Nestle, but it's a huge part of making the work successful because our strongest response will always be when we're first in market, and we need to maximize that time.
And it makes audience that much more important for you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about how you plan for your audiences today, what are some of the data sources or partnerships outside of what you already know? What are you leaning into?
I think some of it is really understanding the relationships people have to communities. So when you see many of us have relocated for work or over the course of our career or for education, but we're still really deeply connected to the communities that we've lived in before, to the communities our families and friends live in. That's one audience and quality that makes you very attuned to look for a way to help when that's what's needed. There might be other more classic indicators if you're a regular donor to nonprofits or to emergency response. But a lot of my mindset is I don't want to be fighting with other nonprofits for the same pie. I really want us to find new audiences, build trust with them, and make them feel like giving and engaging a nonprofit is a way they can have an impact and trust. Because I think it's very easy to kind of watch the news and feel helpless, but there are so many groups out there that maybe are not giving to nonprofit right now or haven't in their adult life, but actually would love that opportunity to feel that they can have a personal impact. So the idea of getting to net new audience is a really important one for us. We don't just want to cannibalize each other within the nonprofit space. We want to be part of bringing new groups into the solution.
Yeah. Are you working with any retail media networks today and leveraging their audiences or talking about how you can collaborate?
That's a great question. I would say where we are on media strategy is that we're entering a year that's really focused on diversifying. So we're coming out of, I think, using too few tools in the toolbox. And something that's been really powerful for us is that we'll have brands and companies that really step up and support us. Sometimes that's with direct cash or with in-kind contributions, but sometimes that's also in how they show up and storytell. So that's where we have showed up the most in retail media is actually when our partner companies, whether that's on the CPG side or retailers themselves, make us part of their story of how they help with communities. So it hasn't to date been part of our direct strategy, but it's been somewhere where we're sort of showing up together with united voices.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about this next year as your role evolves, as the company evolves, as the media evolves.
Yeah, it's an ambitious year for us. I think we're an organization that's grown really fast through the just unbelievable support of communities and people really feeling motivated to have that impact. Let's say faster than we could have ever anticipated and faster than we were built for yet on the marketing side. So we have a lot of opportunity to build a stronger foundation. I would say some of our goals are to really get much smarter on how we use data and how we can be more personalized for those that are already in our ecosystem. That's been a gap for us so far. As I think many nonprofits and organizations that start small, you don't always have the data infrastructure there when you're starting those relationships. And so making sure that we can get value out of that data over time and create a better audience experience for them, that they aren't bombarded with so much information. They really get what we know they care about most. That's one big priority. I think in accordance with that, getting into a better segmentation approach, especially market to market, is a huge one. So we tend to be fairly well known in the US. And because of the number of particularly hurricane responses, though also tornado and flood, has been a way that many Americans have gotten to know us. In other markets, we're not so well known yet, but we've been treating them identically up till this point. So right now we're in the middle of a much bigger process to have a more global strategy that meets people where they are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. All right, so this is your first time at Cannes, right? For this organization.
For this organization is, yeah.
Yeah. And so what has resonated the most in terms of what you're hearing or watching or listening to in a panel, and how that translates to where you need to go next year?
Oh, I love that, because there is so much that's happening with really different kinds of companies and brands that I do have a lot of takeaways from. So I think the biggest conversation that's really like wormed into my brain to stay is that we have audiences that their time, their focus, and their choice is much more precious than maybe how we used to treat it. So they have the opportunity to quickly switch focus, to quickly move on from what you're showing them. There are really no more truly captive audiences in most of the spaces that we communicate. And that means that we need to earn that time and earn that attention in a way that has not always been the default for marketers. It's something that we've been able to take for granted. And when I think about that for us, on one hand, I feel like I have a great assignment because we do have a really active community that's interested in what we're doing, and we can earn their attention because of that passion and compassion. But on the other hand, it also reminds me, like, this is a value exchange. When I show up for an audience and I want their attention or focus or donation, it's not just about what we've done in the past. I need to be with them every time, showing that there's impact and there's a reward. There's value for them in that exchange. When they share their data, when they share their time, when they stick with content that they're viewing of ours. And so that value exchange has become a huge part of my guiding light when I think about all of the choices that we make as a communications
You're
team.
closing the loop with them, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, that really, we can't take for granted that they were interested in us once, so they should be interested in us forever. Every single time we need to show up and have a really quick and compelling why for why something is worth their time or their donation.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much.
I'm really excited for the summit and so appreciate getting to spend time with partners. I feel like I'm learning so much from this group already.
Yeah, same. Right back at you.
So we're back with another guest. Welcome Charlotte Murphy, Head of Retail Media for the UK for Unilever at the Nectar Retail Media Summit, where I think you've already been on stage, haven't you, Charlotte, talking about retail media. So we'll go deep into some of the subjects you've probably already talked about. So maybe start with, how are you seeing across full funnel brand performance retail media, how are you seeing that relationship and the importance of retail media changing, and how is that changing how you work across the many parts of Unilever that I guess connect with a lot of different retailers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant question. I think we've seen retail media go on a real journey the last few years. Mm-hmm. It's really evolved, and the gap has closed between creativity and short-term performance sales focused.
Yeah.
And that's made us really rethink around, how do we plan for retail media, set up for retail media. We see retail media not just as a performance channel, but as an ecosystem that allows us to build brands and drive brand equity. And we've been on a journey to embed retail media into our media planning process so that we can really ensure that we are showing up to our consumer where they are in that path to purchase.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like retail media is less of even though you're a SME, I suppose, in that area, you're joining it up with how planning has worked across all of the other channels and making sure that it plays the right role alongside more brand-led channels or other non-retail media digital channels.
Exactly that. So retail media, because it has gone full funnel, as we often say, planning for it requires a new skill set. And I always say retail media demands a new level of collaboration to plan across all the different areas that retail media can deliver growth for. So my team, we are responsible for looking after retail media. We integrate retail media into brand plans, working very closely with all of our brands to understand the brand jobs to be done and making sure that the retail media plan is fit for purpose to achieve those goals. Our marketing strategy at Unilever is all around driving desire at scale for our brands. And retail media can, of course, be the perfect platform for this. So how we integrate is key, and how we really break through with creativity that connects with our consumers is going to set us apart.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper on that, Charlotte, because I think it's super interesting. And we touched on it just before we started recording, that Unilever's in the experience business, and like, how do you create interesting omni-channel experiences that bring in new to category, but also frequency, etc. So connecting the dots is obviously an important element, but yet in-store, shopper, digital retail media, digital out of home, it's all been quite fragmented to date. And you're clearly trying to think about it from a joined up perspective. So how do you encourage the business to strategically think of retail media, which sometimes is a bit of an awkward name because it suggests it's just this media thing as opposed to data-driven ability to plug into the consumer journey?
Yeah, exactly. And it is a journey. I think every brand's on the journey of, how do we set up for retail media? I often think it's not really about where is it structured. It's more around a set of shared principles. And we make sure we're always thinking around the omni-channel experience, putting the consumer experience right at the heart of what we plan and how we plan. And those principles that go across all the teams at Unilever make sure that we are thinking about retail media, because we're not suddenly just stopping thinking about that consumer experience once they get to a store or once they go on a retailer's website. We need to be thinking full funnel, full path to purchase.
What are all those touch points?
Exactly. What are all those touch points? And how do we show up with content that's relevant for each of those platforms that connect to each consumer?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really refreshing way to think about it. Take it away from bottom of the funnel to the data. Any data set helps you decide when to build a touch point and how to build it. Yeah, I think often in the digital world, we've used data as a means to drive better efficiency or effectiveness only. Of course, it does do that. And you touched on this already, but how is that changing the nature of the partnerships that you're building with retail and the role of your team in those conversations versus, I guess, what would have historically been sales, merchandising, shopper?
Retail media all starts with partnership. It's aligning on shared goals, having that deep understanding of what matters to our consumers, and using that foundation to build partnerships in retail media. Retail media isn't just about buying ad space. It's about co-creating experiences that deliver that excitement across that whole path to purchase. I know I keep saying it, but it's so important that we move away from any sort of channel specific planning. And we really do think multi-channel for how we bring ideas to life across a multi-channel approach. So I think it all starts with partnership, definitely. And we work really closely with our retailers to make sure we are building experiences in collaboration with them.
Right. And I guess that is necessitating a slightly different way of collaborating, because in the past, a lot of these areas have been quite siloed, and partnership by definition means there is value for both sides. So have you guys started to show up in different ways to kind of just change what was originally a very clearly buyer-seller relationship to one that has actually got things moving both ways?
Yeah, it's a great question because it has to evolve to meet the new media landscape that we're now in. And I always say this, and I'll continue to keep saying it, that retail media demands a new level of collaboration. Right. It means that we are meeting internally and externally with people in a room that may have never been in a room before. Right. So we can really plan and be future thinking in how we plan for retail media. And that does mean stepping outside of how you may have done things a few years ago with buyers and how that works with planning media. But it's completely changing. What I would say at Unilever is that all of our teams, our commercial teams, are upskilled on retail media because it's important that they're also talking to their teams' equivalents at the retailers. So it's definitely a journey that we're on, but we are all on a journey to upskill. It's a crucial part of our relationship with retailers. And it's even more crucial in terms of how we speak and cut through to connect with our...
I think that's a brilliant point. And I think it's not one that gets talked about quite as much. Yeah. Everyone talks about partnership and changing the JBP process. But I think what you hit on there, like starting different kind of conversations, educating and upskilling on both sides so that you've got common language and common shared goals to create shared value, because all of those teams are all trying to create mutual value. But sometimes I think in the past, maybe the weight of it might have fallen on the buyers rather than the sellers. But that relationship has clearly evolved in the way that you're thinking about playing the role as an educator and an influencer in a shifting landscape as much as the practitioner knowledge of retail media. I think is a really great point.
Yeah, we need people who understand media to be talking about retail media. Right. And that's why it's really important that we upskill the wider teams and that we have people in a room that maybe have never worked together so we can actually be helping different areas of the business put the best plans forward for all of our brands. Yeah. And that might be bringing together different agencies that have never spoken to each other before. We're on a journey to integrate our agency more into retailers' agencies and how we work together and collaborate.
There's more people in the room every meeting.
And sometimes there is a lot of people. Actually, sometimes you only need that to happen once to kick off the discussion.
Right, make people feel involved.
Well,
and then
everyone has something valuable to add. That's the thing, because you're not going to find someone that has the answers to everything. So sometimes you need to bring everyone together to begin with, and then we can all understand what we're trying to do, and then that really sets us up well for a brilliant cut through retail media strategy.
I love that. It reminds me, early on in my career, I worked in traditional media and then very early moved into digital, and I just saw two different groups. I mean, now there are like 30 different groups of people. Like if you're a paid social person, retail media, web development, brand, everyone talks different languages. And I think retail media leaders like yourself actually are re-architecting like a translation role. Like it's, of course, you've got the knowledge but actually a lot of the time I think you're just translating and connecting the dots so that everybody can see where the opportunity is.
Yeah, I think that's why retail media, we often refer to it as a channel, but it is an ecosystem because there's so many different areas you can tap into, whether it's insights, activation, measurement. Yeah. There's so many areas, it's so broad, and so many people across the business can benefit from different areas of that ecosystem. Right. So again, it's making sure, like you say, it's highlighting what those are in retail media and how they're changing, because the innovations in retail media are changing constantly. It's such an exciting space.
Yeah, and make it accessible to your point.
Make it accessible.
If it's scary, just human nature behaviour is that you're a bit fearful. This seems like the new stuff and this is the old stuff and I'm over here. Whereas actually the smart people are the ones that realise that they can bridge.
Yeah.
So last question, Charlotte, before we wrap up is there anything else that you've heard or seen in Cannes where you're like, going to take that back to the team. We need to focus more on that?
Oh, good question. I've seen there's been so many great things at Cannes. We just heard from Kate at the Nectar event, and she spoke about the future is really about how do we bring brand ideas to life through every channel. I think that's really important that we continue to think about that and include retail media in that. Right. So fully integrating retail media to bring that creative experience to life, retail media has become a canvas for creativity, and the bar just keeps getting set higher and higher every year for creativity. So I think how we bring those ideas closer together throughout that whole ecosystem of the shopper experience that you're going to go on is going to be really great.
I like that. To me, I mean, I've said this before, but I think retail media was almost becoming a pathfinder for all media to kind of show that actually if you use data intelligently across the whole consumer journey, you can build more integrated, joined up touch points rather than all this siloed behavior. Retail media, I think by definition, because you have the in-store element,
yes,
it's a necessity because so much is bought still in store, even though e-commerce is rising, you have to join the dots.
Definitely. And it's so important. We've done studies at Unilever that show just how important it is to be planning on-site, off-site and in-store holistically. And that often we come back to as a team as well, because again, the consumer isn't just in one area. We are consumers and we are everywhere. So we need to be planning for everywhere.
Yeah, love it. Thank you, Charlotte. I really appreciate making the time. It was a great conversation.
Thanks very much.
I'm delighted to be joined by Kristen Nolte from Dell. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Nick.
Kristen, could you just give us a little intro into yourself and what you do at Dell?
I am the SVP of media at Dell, and I run everything between B2B to B2C to what is becoming everything and ubiquitous with everything media.
Great. So given that you run everything, in a world where you've got to justify every marketing dollar, how are you balancing that long-term brand building with short-term performance?
It's been a big evolution for us, to be honest. We started with, as most people, kind of what can you measure? So last click analysis, learning how to work bidding platforms with ROAS, et cetera. And then we got into complex media mix models, but we haven't really known how to bring the two together in a more cohesive way. So the last click is awesome. You can manage it in real time. It's hourly. Media mixes are longer and they take longer to take hold, but they're probably more accurate in terms of your total upside. So our latest and greatest has been using the media mix as really our platform for determining how our dollars are spent in the planning phases. But then we use more transactional KPIs as we think about the journey of the customer. So not just last click revenue, but things like engagement, and are we starting to see people consent to having relationships with us? Are they providing their email address? Are we seeing engagement scores in digital video? Are they watching the whole entire episode, et cetera? So it's kind of a new frontier of measurement framework for us, but it's working.
Fantastic. And then within that new frontier, where's retail media fitting for you as a business?
Yeah, so retail is part of our omnichannel. It's part of our journey. So we actually get a lot of insights from our retail partners, first and foremost, even before we see some of that on our own. If you think about it, retail provides the ultimate choice, right? They've got the comparisons. They have all the things when people are starting that early journey, whether they're doing it in Amazon or they're going to a brick and mortar store or however they're handling that. And they get that early phase. They get that first touch of the customer who's saying, I don't know what I want yet. I just know I need something. So we take a lot of those insights. We work hand in hand across that customer journey. And our job is to take that insight, and wherever the customer goes next, we're ready with as much insight as we possibly can have.
You touched on customer journey there, and I think it feels like a massive cliche to say that things are changing in marketing, but it does feel like the customer journey is more fragmented than ever. People are using things like Perplexity, but I just wondered how at Dell you're thinking about that customer journey and what it means to you and your relationship with your customers.
It's funny, we all, I think when I went to school anyway, not all of us, I won't claim that you're my age, Nick, but it was very funnel-ish. Like we always talked about the funnel. There's like, oh, you do this, then it's this, then this, and we drill people down. And then there was like this linear journey, right? That customers would take. Oh, well, it's not exactly a funnel. It's phases of education throughout a more linear process. And now it's like a spider web. People are going into certain spaces. They're coming out of certain spaces. There's things that we haven't known how to track yet. There's things like the LLMs that are not clickable media. So people are asking questions and having conversations way before they even land on our website or go to a retail store or go to Amazon or however they're going to make that ultimate purchase. So those signals that we used to capture along the way, like that were very distinct to our brand or our store inside of wherever it was, A lot of that research happens well before they enter any of those domains. And then they may come back out, but it's like the whole thought process of what we do with them has also evolved. And knowing that, hey, it's okay to get them in a platform, for example. Like we used to measure, for example, social clicks from a social platform to our website. Now it's like people aren't leaving the social platform. Like they're even transacting inside of those social platforms. So it's a whole new way of thinking about performance and what that means and looking for those early signals that you're not going to see coming directly to you anymore.
Yeah. And in that world, the retailers are becoming powerful media owners. How are you starting to think about, or not starting, how are you continuing to think about retailers and their role within that whole process?
Everyone who touches a customer right now is considered a partner, right? It's in some way, shape, or form. And there's a reason why these retail media partnerships are emerging. It's because they're owning the impressions, they're owning the conversation. They're also, in some cases, managing through what pops in these LLMs and what pops in SEO today. They, again, have the ultimate customer dynamic of the upper part of the conversation. And so it's been a really awesome evolution for us because choice is great. Like we have lots of opportunities to optimize our media plans. And that's just another weapon in the arsenal.
Yeah, another opportunity to talk to people. You've been at Cannes for sort of 3 or 4 days now. I'd love to just get a little bit of insight from your perspective about what's important and how you're seeing the conversations that are happening here.
Beyond like the rosé bottles that I've learned. Exactly. Some really interesting conversations about marketers becoming customer experience officers, which I find incredibly insightful because it's going back to the experience you offer your brand and the word of mouth that you get. Now, word of mouth now comes through digital channels and communities and ways that people interact with your brand and about your brand. But it kind of gets back to some really core values around, hey, your customer experience actually drives what you do. And popping in those things are becoming ever important to people actually considering your brand and getting whatever traffic that you might see to your website or to your stores or wherever you're selling your product, because that's what's showing up. And it kind of is just a reminder of the basics. And then the other piece is just honestly the world of agentic and what these agents will do for us in taking some of the more operational constraints off of us. And that's really how I see it. We've been constrained by our own businesses. We've been trying to do personalization at scale for quite some time, and we haven't been unsuccessful at doing so. We've tried to be in all markets and all languages, and that's very difficult unless you throw people at the problem. And now the opportunity is really opened up for us. So we're considering which new locations will we actually start putting more marketing dollars into. It's just fundamentally changing that and learning more about just how people are already using agents and what they do. It's a obviously new frontier for us all, but it's going to unlock so many opportunities as we go forward. So excited to see where that goes.
Exciting times. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us on Time for a Reset. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
We're in Cannes, going to talk about what the trends that are coming out in Cannes, and we're at the Nectar retail media event where Nectar earlier this week launched the new AI retail media platform. So interesting to see two kind of hot trends intersecting with each other. Rob, maybe you can just give a little bit of a brief intro to your background and what you do, and then I'll ask you a little bit about what you're seeing in Cannes and what you think is being reset in terms of what marketers are prioritizing.
Sure. So I've been in marketing or advertising for more than 2 decades. I won't put a number on it, but long enough. I remember monoprint advertising, let's put it that way. So yeah, my background has been across media and agency, primarily media and all forms of it. And then I've stepped into client side 6 years ago with Arla. Why? We wanted to see the whole journey and understand that process from start to finish and be able to manage that through. And that's really exciting to see with our brands because we have some huge brands globally and in the UK. So my role at Arla is head of media and digital. So my team that I have established and built over that kind of 6 years is responsible for nearly 60% of our working spend, our activations for 14, 15 brands across the UK. Some of those brands include Lurpak, huge beasts, an amazing product, Del Milk, and then we're really investing in the master brand now to tell the story about who Arla is in the UK as well.
No, I've seen a lot of the other brands have got the Arla master brand anchored to them or somewhere within the packaging.
Yeah. And typically we've been a sub-brand led business, but now we need to tell the story of the master brand to build that purpose and that understanding through consumers.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. You touched on, quite interestingly, the fact that 60% of your working budget you manage in-house. And there's always an interesting debate about is there more of it happening or less of it happening? And I always think it's quite fascinating. It always depends on who you ask. Right. Speaking to a few reporters, very senior editors whose view was in-housing is a dead trend. And I'm like, I'm not so sure. So I'd love to get your view on how has it given you competitive advantage and how do you think about that and the way you work with your agencies at a time when we're in Cannes, when there's a lot of challenges around the kind of holding group model and what position they play in a world where brands do more what you've done, which is take responsibility for strategy, audience planning, insight, and then use some agencies to do some more plug-in specialist work.
I see it as a blended relationship. I don't see that changing. I think where we've been really clear and concise in what we've done is we've owned more of the performance-related activation, but building that out. So it used to be that my role would be just digital activation, but actually the reality is it's just media, it's just content. So we've built out from there. But it's really important that you have open and honest dialogue with your partners, and that's what we've done. And actually, the last 2 years, when we've done our audits on our media buying and delivery, we've had the best 2 years we've ever had. And that's a shared responsibility from what we deliver, but also being super clear and working with, in partnership, our agency, so they can deliver based on what we want to achieve. And then we can audit it and understand the measurement principles and successes and sharing that success. So do I think in-housing is a dying art form? No. Do I think it's going to explode as it did a few years ago? Probably not at the same pace, but I see it more of a collaboration. Right. That's the critical piece. Wherever you sit, there's a specialism with your responsibilities. It needs to be open and collaborative.
I like the way you frame that. I think that blended is a really interesting way you think what we often call it right housing rather than in-housing.
Yeah, sure.
Because no two brands look at in-housing in quite the same way. You have to decide what are we brilliant at and what do we want to take in-house and have FTs on our kind of P&L for versus where can we bring different types of specialists in. And I love the premise of you still want to partner with your agencies, but just in different ways. But I guess what that means is they need to lean in to have the adaptability and the agility to work in different ways rather than 100%. Put their arms around all the media budget, which is what they've been used to.
Yeah, 100%. And the landscape is shifting so quickly that there's capabilities that none of us have. So we learn together, and that's that collaborative approach. And yes, you'll have specialisms and lean on those specialisms, but the market and the landscape and the opportunity to activate has changed so quickly that neither of us are going to be best in class. We need to learn.
The power of collaboration gets you faster, quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a live conversation is very much around, typically and historically, we've been partnered with a media side of the network agency. My question has been, should we be looking higher up and going, actually, across the whole network, there's probably disciplines and skill sets we're not touching. And actually, as we change, as we move forward, does that relationship breathe out based on what we need for our experiences with our consumers, not just solely, I need to buy eyeballs.
That's a really good point that I hope a lot of agencies listen to hear that, because it might be that the nature of how you engage with, but if you're a trusted advisor and you contribute to how the business is growing, then your relationship could adapt and grow in different ways rather than it be, we've got less than we used to.
Yeah. And look, I think we've been really lucky with a number of the relationships that side and individuals that have leaned into that conversation, understood the direction of travel and the ask. And because we're not doing it for the sake of doing it, we're doing it to drive value. And if we drive value and we're better at what we do, it's a better story for the agency then to tell other clients around what they've helped to deliver.
Absolutely. With that blended team, how does you balancing brand versus performance marketing versus retail media, which is a fairly new art, how do you do that? Have you built an internal MMM? And how do you think about getting that right balance and how much responsibility is on your team to drive that versus the agency?
Always thinking about it. It will never end effectively. There's two goals for us, and that's what we need to be super clear on, is branded growth and in-year sales. Those are the premises to your point around storytelling and performance. We model, yes, we've got an existing relationship with Ubiquity to our MMM. We've built in-house capability as well. So that relationship has changed. Yeah. So we can access more of that data ourselves in a faster turnaround. But I also think when we look at budget allocation and planning, the pressure is building to go, there's one pot of money. It's got to do two things. It's got to keep the retailers happy as well. but more importantly, it's got to be impactful for consumers.
Right.
So we're building that concept of an Arla media universe within our agency partners planning tool. But we are pushing the boundaries. We are asking for more when we talk about retail media is, can you plan for that? And how does that then work? We then take that with econometrics and modeling to say, I want to see the success. Right. I want to see how this is delivering value.
What's the actual real contribution?
Absolutely. Because we need to go back and say, as a UK business, this pot of money delivered this. As a category, we delivered this. Mm-hmm. As a brand within that category, this is what you delivered.
Right.
And that's a great story to then tell retailers as well as you farmer owners, as we are a cooperative.
Right. And I think it's so fascinating, this whole dynamic, because I think two things can be true at once, which is a lot of people are saying that retail media is going to be all media. I think that was the panel you were just on, it was framed that. But on the other end, a lot of people are saying, well, the cost of the data is actually making it quite challenging. And sometimes some of my other media is outperforming. So both of those things can be true at the same time, which I guess does make that point around how do we really get into understanding contribution, incrementality on your net sales value?
100%. I think we'll see another step change over the next couple of years in measurement and measurement principles. Typically, I think within our business, we kind of first click, last click mentality of if it's above the line, then that's what's driven it. If it's below the line, then that's what's driven it as a conversion.
Agreed. Yeah.
And the reality is, I think we need to evolve that thinking to go, okay, well, what's the confidence weighting around each step and each investment into activation?
Yeah.
And then measure whether we were happy within that confidence index by the step. Because each media can't just have the same measurement principles. It's not a flat line.
No.
So we, again, are talking about how do we change our measurement framework to accurately suggest that we're talking about above the line activation. We know exactly where we're performing. We're talking about below the line. What does it look like from an in-store or an e-com perspective?
Right.
And that's tough yards at the moment, getting people to commit and understand and build consistency. Because if I go back to my earlier point and say in the last 2 years, we've had the best media success we've ever had, we're doing something pretty well. What we need to do is migrate that through the whole process.
Very interesting. You talked about shopper and obviously the retailers. You've had sales relationships with those retailers for years. How is the JBP process adapting, and how are you adapting your structure to be able to manage that? Because it doesn't sound like anyone's getting it entirely right.
Yeah, I can't believe anybody's got it right. And we're among that, to be brutally honest. We collaborate across sales and marketing. Do we have a structure that would facilitate it as a centre of excellence? Not currently. Is that on the radar? Potentially. That's my opinion. That's where we should get to, but we're not there yet. So I think the JBP is dependent on retailer relationship. What's the future of that? Yes, we'll always have tactical investments with retailers, but actually let's absolutely be clear on what is working spend within that. So what's the JMP? And then how do we measure that in relation to every other media that gives it a fair crack of the whip? And then as a retail media owner, you live and die by the value you add to that relationship. That's the difference. So I think what we're starting to see is maybe a mindset shift between the retailers from I'm a supplier to I'm now a client of yours. Right. So that's a big shift.
Yeah. It was a pure buyer-seller relationship, and now it's going both ways.
Yeah. And then if you add in the media side of that as well, it becomes a publisher mentality rather than a retailer. But still hold the retailer values and be a retailer, but the mindset and being able to step into a publisher thought set is really important.
Yes. And publisher mindset, whilst not forgetting at the end of the day, there's a customer experience that editorial and content enriches that experience. But at the end of the day, someone wants to get the product they need, well, particularly in your, people buy it. It's a very quick, regular purchase. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the opportunity to understand and how you interject and either inspire or disrupt somebody to buy your product is really important. So I'll give you a quick stat. In the UK, more people spend more time thinking about the toilet roll they're going to buy than the milk they're going to buy.
Wow.
So when people are in store, you have to have activated really strongly before people get in. But you also then need to bring that theatre as well to be able to entice people through to that, because we are talking about branded milk. And that doesn't come at the same price as own label.
And you're in a category where it seems like there's a different version of milk launching all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think that, again, we're guilty, that's what we believe is the right thing to do. So we'll look at insight and we'll look at the human truth around a need state or a mission, and we'll bring milk out where it's relevant to. And we have done recently with protein milk. So having launched that very, very recently.
It's got protein in it.
It has indeed. Well, we've got our Starbucks ready to drink coffee with protein in as well. So just a little bit of a little plug. There we go.
So finally, last question.
Yes.
Is there anything we haven't talked about that you've seen in Cannes as like surprised you and was like, I must tune my team into that? I mean, other than AI, maybe.
Yeah. So we're starting to talk across the global business around connected experiences for consumers and for shoppers through our brands. And that's been a mantra across multiple sessions that I've seen, which I think is brilliant. And obviously the guys at Nectar spoke about that today as well.
Yeah.
For me, if we focus on that, how do we measure for it? So I said in the panel earlier, yes, we do ROI, but how do we move to an ROE measure? What's my return on experience? Right. When you think about branded growth and sales. So I think that planning for experience is really good because what it does do is it breathes creativity. And that's what
And the vast majority of people are still always going to buy their milk in a physical store.
Well, really, really loyal as well.
Right. But the digital experience and how that connects, we all know it's important, but I don't think we've got all the tool sets to be able to join the dots. Maybe AI will help with that.
Yeah.
But it could make it less human.
I think that's a really exciting area creatively for us because I think what we're guilty of is probably just having a set number of assets, making them work.
Right.
But the reality is of AI and creative AI is that mission stroke need state moment and testing and learning quickly to be able to deliver either in the big stores, main estate, in convenience, in petrol station. Where are we?
Right message, right place, right time. My job hasn't changed, just we've got new tools. So look, Rob, wonderful conversation. Thank you for making the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our Cannes Lion 2025 special, brought to you by Overline. We hope these brand side perspectives give you fresh insight into how marketing leaders are navigating change and making retail media work harder across the entire customer journey. If you haven't yet listened to part 2, don't miss it. We're speaking with retail leaders about the future of retail media and how stronger collaboration can unlock more value for everyone. For more episodes like this, follow Time for a Reset wherever you get your podcasts. And if you liked what you heard, leave us a rating, share it with a colleague, and subscribe to be the first one to know when a new episode drops. See you next time.